good to have you join us again for your favorite program coming to you from NT2 Lagos Network channel. It's my pleasure always to be here with you, knowing that you're out there waiting for us to, well, bring you another distinguished guest to speak to us about Nigeria and the roles that many of us are playing as citizens of this country or as citizens of the world. We always say on this show that our guests are distinguished because within their 40, they have been able to put on the table or to demonstrate, to exhibit, well, very, very unusual capacities and competences. Today, again, we have decided to bring into the studio, well, a Nigerian not by birth, but a Nigerian by association and also a Nigerian by achievement. I think if I'm going to say that, yes, because she is an international. Did I say she? I shouldn't have said that. I wanted to hold on to that for a while. But okay, there it goes. She is an international media personage. Actually, if many of you have been watching television critically over the years, this is a face that you will know easily once she appears on your screen. She's had to interview several international figures and personalities, running from Bill Clinton to the president of Sudan to many other big names on the BBC World News and the program Hard Talk. Now, she's going to be here today to speak about so many things. I've spent over 30 years in television. She was born in Sudan, but by the age of 3, she found herself in the UK, went to school in the UK, got a first degree, got a second degree, and got a doctoral as a thank you from one of the biggest universities in the UK. So my pleasure to welcome on your behalf onto Close Flow and to Nigeria. Who do you think is going to be here to speak to me? Zeinab Badawi, you're welcome to Close Flow.
Thank you. The suspense was killing me, FM.
Now, she has called me by my favorite name, that is FM, not fast mover, but frequency modulation. So I'm going to find a way to modulate this appearance, because Zeinab is just like, a friend just said to me on Facebook, this is a big catch. I don't know about the catch yet, but I will talk about it.
We haven't even started and I'm already laughing.
In 2009, Zeinab, the Association of the International Broadcasters gave you the International TV Personality Award.
Yeah.
Do you think media personalities are still great role models now?
Are we great role models? It's a very crowded field now, you know, FM. Obviously, there are giants such as yourself.
A deep breath.
I saw you refer to your program as your favorite program.
Yes.
So I'm going along with that theme. I mean, look, I'm flattered if anybody sees me as a role model. Of course, the industry when I started more than 30 years ago is very different from the one it is now. And as I said, it's a very crowded field now. So it is much harder to make your mark. But if in any way I have, you know, encouraged women to seek a career in the media, then go for it, ladies.
How about children? How about youngsters? The new generation see the media differently.
Absolutely. You know, I've got 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. The youngest is 17, the eldest is 22. And when I look at the way they consume the media, it's very different from my parents' generation, from my generation. And I think that obviously is because of the impact of the digital age.
Technology.
Absolutely, the technology. I mean, I think it's akin to the impact that we saw in the 1500s in Europe with the printing press. And obviously, this thing in your hand, the mobile phone, especially for youngsters in Africa, is their computer in their hand. And that's how they consume, that's how they live their lives. I mean, it's an extension of their arm, isn't it? My kids are like that. Anything happens to it, it's like they've lost their oxygen supply. So I think that is the challenge, is to how to adapt the traditional media to meet the needs of the millennials.
Now, you just took that out of my mind, really, because now traditional media, therefore, will probably go extinct if you're not careful.
I mean, there is, I prefer to see it as the digital revolution can complement what the traditional media has done rather than compete with it.
Or eliminate it.
Yeah, or eliminate it, make it extinct. But of course, it does present challenges, but it also presents opportunities. And I think that you can have the mainstream traditional medium, television. I mean,
radio.
We are on TV now, aren't we?
Yes.
And radio. And a lot of people consume their news that way or use it for entertainment. They like a big screen. But we've also got to be mindful that we make it accessible online, on mobile phone apps. And that's what the BBC is doing, for instance. You know, it's got this app where you can get your news, and obviously bbc.com is the most visited website. So I think that certainly for a big organisation like the BBC, it is adapting to this new world.
Now,
are you guys doing that too?
Now, you should be asking my management if you're doing that. Oh, sure, but we are doing it seriously. Now, because we're actually streaming this live and we're also going to YouTube it. But that actually is where my concern is. Now, do you think street level eyewitnessing accounts will now begin to influence news reporting more than editorials at the top level? Do you think so in the future?
Undoubtedly. I think the fact that this phone in your hand has really revolutionized the way we gather news.
Yes.
So anything can happen in any part of the world, and there'll be somebody with a phone with, you know, an eyewitness account, basically. And I think that's really opened up the sources of information for people who work in the news media. I think that, you know, it's harder for people in power to say, look, you know, there was an election.
Conceal.
To conceal. So it's a very, very, you know, sunlight is a strong antiseptic, and this is a strong antiseptic because it really is harder to conceal. However, it also does come with some, you know, hidden problems, such as, you know, obviously fake news. And certainly, you know, again, at the BBC, there's a whole team of people, dozens and dozens of them, who are monitoring stuff that comes through on the internet. And so, you know, for example, I don't know, take a country like Syria, you might have a piece of video that's saying this is an atrocity that's being carried out by Syrian rebels or government forces or whatever. So, you know, we'll have a team of experts who speak Arabic who'll say, you know what, the accent isn't quite right, the number plates on the car are not Aleppo or whatever, the weather isn't right for that climate. So, you know, you need...
forensic.
You do need that kind of forensic thing. So, yes, it has opened up, you know, more sources, but you've also got to be more mindful that those sources may be bogus. Fake news. We're all worried about fake news.
Now that you have said that, you know, around here in Nigeria, virtually everything that we see, especially, well, social media, we'll think is photoshopped. You think...
I could do with a bit of photoshopping now, you know. I've had a beautiful long week in Lagos, eaten too much, stayed up too late, chatting to people that I could do with a bit of photoshopping. But anyway, yes, I know. It's, you know, the media, there's a tug of war between the media presenting reality as it is and then, you know, the doctoring that goes on. Let's just say that I sympathise with those people out there who want to do a bit of photoshopping. Sometimes you need it, but I think if it's used to distort and to mislead, then it's not right. But if it's just there to enhance and entertain, then it doesn't matter. If a, you know, Kim Kardashian lookalike or Kim Kardashian herself wants to, you know, change her silhouette or something, then that's her prerogative.
Are you in a way worried by the opinion by some people that the clouds of images, objects, and even opinions, shades of opinions that we have shared around the world are being controlled by very few people? Less than 1% of the world population? Are you worried? Do you think there's a truth to that?
Who, you mean that there are some media moguls?
Yes, who manipulate, I mean, as it were, the perceptions of people.
Yes, okay, look, you're asking something in a very polite way, and maybe if I just take that thought and develop it further within the context of Africa, if you are asking whether the international media has had a tendency to portray Africa and Africans in a certain way, and that has been the window, you know, through the world of seeing that, then yes, I think that is true, that we have had for so many years, you know, the international media being dominated and concentrated in the West. The proliferation of channels that we've seen from other parts of the world, you know, we now have news channels from all over the world, and people are getting access to that, then that has, I think, mitigated, you know, that effect. But still, the big beasts, the ones with the real huge global, footprint,
Presence, yes.
are still perhaps the Western ones. So I still think that we have a way to go in ensuring that how people see themselves and how people want to challenge the perceptions and the prejudices that perhaps still persist. We need to have a wider variety, a greater...
More than what we have
exactly,
right now.
More than we have. And I think, there is a recognition, certainly at the BBC, that we do want to portray Africa in all its manifestations. And there has been a tendency for news, and news has that inherent quality built into it, that it will focus on the difficulties of life, be it in Africa, Asia, Middle East, Europe, or whatever. But now, we are recognising that Africans have got many stories to tell in the cultural sector, in the business sector, in the social sector, and that we mustn't, just look at it in a
beyond the
narrow
gravity
way.
of the difficult,
the coup, the war, the famine, and all that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, if for instance, if you're going to X-ray the Sustainable Development Goals, what do you think should be the compulsory things for the government and people of Africa to lock into? What have you looked at that?
Yeah, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which of course, succeeded the Millennium Development Goals.
Yes.
I mean, look, I think that they are right. The spirit is right. I worry sometimes that it's difficult to have 17 priorities. But if it comes down to, really making sure that citizens have rights,
into this, yes.
Have rights, have human rights, have social rights, so that they have, proper shelter, have, a good diet, and so on and so forth. Then, of course, the rights of citizens must be observed right across the board. And then obviously the Sustainable Development Goals went further than the MDGs by saying, sustainable development is important, climate change, the right to quality jobs, quality education. So, I mean, I think goals are good. It's good for us to have targets like that, by which we can measure how well a government is doing. Yeah, but progress is also important. So sometimes, even if a country hasn't met the target in the Sustainable Development Goals, if it's progress, making good progress, then that should be acknowledged. But I think that, it is incumbent on governments to ensure the rights of their citizens in all its manifestations, human rights, social and, civic rights, and so on and so forth.
But by broadening the goals to also include the participation, the fuller, better participation of the Western world,
yes.
Do you think that is also a good movement?
I mean, look, when it comes to Africa, I'm of the view that no country in history has been developed by outsiders. That is a fact.
That is a reality.
That's a reality. Yes. Yeah, perhaps Germany after the Second World War with the Marshall Plan. But primarily, that is a fact. However, it does not mean that African countries cannot work in partnership with Western governments in all sorts of ways. But I think it's incumbent on Africans to be in the driving seat. And when it comes to funds, they can't look to Western governments to drive their own development. You've got to mobilise, your domestic resources. Domestic resource mobilisation is very, very important. I remember Trevor Manuel, the former finance minister of South Africa, said aid is spelt TAX, tax. In other words, Africans, mobilise your own domestic resources, and you've done wonderful things here in Nigeria.
Yes.
Your former state governor, Fashola in Lagos,
yes.
Really increased the tax, take up. So I think that kind of approach is right. Africans have to look at themselves and working in partnership, but telling the international community that there has to be a fairer international economic order. For too long, we've seen that the international economic system has been loaded against Africans. And so I think, Africans have to be great advocates for themselves and say, we won't tolerate this state of affairs. Fair terms of trade and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Okay. But also, Africa seems to have an internal challenge. And that is a question again of, is it corruption? Do you think it's just corruption or bad governance?
I think bad governance follows from the two. The two are inextricably linked. That corruption thrives through bad governance, and bad governance begets corruption. So really, if you tackle governance and try to achieve good governance, then everything else should really flow from it. It's a very, very simple fact, And good governance, there are lots of indicators that one can use, the Mo Ibrahim Index
For
of
instance,
good governance.
yes.
My fellow Sudanese Mo
Yes,
Ibrahim,
yes.
the former telecoms
I hope I'm going to get him to be here one day and speak also about. Yeah, you'll tell him for me. Great!
I will pick up the phone and I will tell him to come and be interviewed by you. Yeah, no, so he's got this great Ibrahim Index of good governance, whereby, he looks at how governments are doing, the scores on education, on healthcare provision, on, freedom of speech and so on. In the UK, I was chair of something called Article 19 for many years. And Article 19, of course, is the 19th article in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is freedom of speech, the free flow of information. And I've always remembered that the Nobel Prize-winning economist, the Indian-born economist Amartya Sen, said there has been no famine in any country where there is freedom of speech.
Say that again for our viewers to get.
Yeah, there has been no famine in any country where there is freedom of speech, because it's a fundamental right. And as Kofi Annan said, it's a cornerstone of democracy. So if you just think about it, this is a Nobel Prize-winning economist.
Yes.
He supported this with all his wonderful charts and so on. So it just simply means that if a people are free and are free to speak out and so on and so forth, then that by and large suggests that there is a free society and that there is, no famine. So I think that, it is a fundamental right, which is why I, was very happy being chair of Article 19 for many years. And,
no, but there's something else again, Zeinab, that, that I'm a little bit worried about, but speaking about the media. Social media this time around, are you disturbed by the broad spread of sexually explicit imagery?
Oh God, yeah, it's terrible. As the mother of 2 daughters, especially, I do worry. I think that the image that is presented sometimes of women on social media, it's really appalling, and the pornography that's available. Exactly. And you do worry, and you worry about predators, sexual predators, contacting young women, young girls on social media, and it's like everything in life, isn't it? The internet is great, it's good in so many ways, but it's also, like everything else, also dangerous. It's like fire. Fire is a wonderful thing to have, but it has to be controlled because it can also be very destructive.
Wow. Now, as a mother of 4, Zeinab, are you in any way intrigued also by the fact that the world is getting to the stage where motherhood, actually motherhood, a friend of mine describes this as the best job, as the greatest job in the world. That motherhood is either going to be proscribed or deleted, either by surrogacy or by the rainbow sexual orientation.
Not for us in Africa.
I know, I know, but...
Look, some women may take a conscious decision not to have a child, and that is their choice.
Decision, yes.
That is their choice, and that is their decision. Some people sadly may want to have children, but nature has decreed that they are not able to have children. But for me, personally, it was very important for me to have children. And I always say to my children, my 4 best presents in life didn't come on my birthday, they came on your birthdays, equal joint. First, and so for me, my role and identity as a mother, of course, is the most important thing. And people see me flying all around the world and say, oh, has she seen her children? But, I actually didn't start traveling until the youngest was about 10.
Wow.
And before that, and I travel in a way which is, even filming for this history series, which we'll talk about in a while.
Yes.
I was all over Africa, but I would try and just concentrate everything into a short span, because I didn't want to be away from my children. But they're older now, so actually the youngest was at boarding school through his own choice. It was a bit.
So motherhood, it's
important
and very rewarding.
Yeah, and if surrogacy is the only way that some people can become parents, then fair enough. And I'm delighted that women who wish to have children, or families, couples that wish to have children, have got, various medical procedures that they can undergo in order to facilitate that for them. Yeah.
Okay, now, but parenting in the information age, how daunting is it now?
It is very difficult, isn't it? I mean, because in the information age, there's an information overload. And I think that from an educational point of view, and, I come from a family of educators, and it's very important for us, education, young people can conflate information with knowledge. And
please say that again for my viewers.
Yeah,
So they can, yes.
they can conflate information with knowledge. And also, I think that, you've got to retain things in your mind. And I think that because everything is that, I can just press a button and find out what happened and when happened. I tell you a story. I was an undergraduate at Oxford University, and I went back a year or so ago and had dinner in one of the fine colleges there, All Souls. And we were sitting in the library having coffee and cake at the end. And I looked at this wonderful library that had been going on since, for hundreds of years. And I said to one of the elderly professors who'd retired, who was a professor of English, and I said, what do you think about technology now that people get information at the press of a button? And he said, I've spent my life gathering data and a collection of poems that mention the moon. And, I had this huge repository of information in my head. And now you can just click a button and say,
and it's there.
Poetry that has
the moon
in it. You get all this stuff. And I thought, did this man think that his life work was wasted and so on? But I thought not, actually, because he's got it in his head, you see, and he's thought about it. It's not just, so I worry about young people not retaining information. This is the best computer that has ever been invented.
Yes.
And to date, it has never been bettered, and I doubt it will ever be bettered, the human brain. So I will say to young people, don't forget that, use it.
I like that. Now, but for parenting, I'm a little bit still worried, though. Is it fulfilling for you?
What, parenting?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, my priorities, now, in the past, in the future, always will be my 4 beloved children. I mean, look, I'm an African. Family is everything to us. And my father, I'm sorry, sadly died last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but my mother is with me, touch wood, and she's currently visiting Sudan, visiting family there. I'm one of 6 children, touch wood. We are 3 boys and 3 girls. My parents were very blessed. My nephews and nieces, we're a very close-knit.
And that is very African.
Very. Yeah. So
now, are you worried, Zeinab, though, that some prevalences in Africa may seem to just say we are not human enough? I mean, look at child mortality, look at maternal mortality. We have the worst results in those areas.
Yeah, it is very, very sad that a lack of adequate healthcare provision has meant that maternal health rate mortality rate for mothers is so much higher than it should be.
Yes.
Hemorrhaging, something that's very simple that they needn't die of. I mean, look, we all know that African governments have to spend, I think it's 12 to 15% of their GDP on health. And to date, only a fraction of African governments dedicate that much money to their health spending. And we really, really must do that. Because I go back to, it's a basic right of citizens to expect adequate healthcare provision from their governments.
And when there's freedom of speech, there's no famine. So where there's freedom of speech, of course, you may not have...
Yeah, freedom of speech and free flow of information, and also that, speaking truth to power and saying we need hospitals, we need roads that will take us to the hospitals. But, I think leaders in Africa now recognise that there is this huge infrastructural deficit, and I think that's very important. One of your great exports, Akin Adesina, who's the current president of the African Development Bank, has made that one of his top priorities, and they're trying to put billions in, because we know, I think the deficit is about $50 billion. About that or something like that. And, it is a continent-wide initiative, and I think it's absolutely critical that we power Africa, that we have roads in Africa. And
we have rails in Africa.
And he drums the message. And also intra-African trade is, so low.
That used to be there, Trans-Sahara, centuries before.
Absolutely. And Africans don't trade with one another as much as, say, the Asians do. Intra-Asian trade, I think, is something like 25% of their total trade. Here in Africa, it's about 10% of intra-African trade. It's very, very low. We need to start having... I'm a great Pan-Africanist.
That's great.
I'm a great Pan-Africanist.
That's great.
Absolutely. And I think that, in a sense, we've lost sight of the appeal of Pan-Africanism. You know, we had Kwame Nkrumah in
Yes.
Ghana and Julius Nyerere in Tanzania and
Senghor.
Jomo Kenyatta, Leopold Senghor of Senegal. You know, these leaders who in the early 1960s, during that period of rapid decolonization in Africa, you know, they said, look, Pan-Africanism is the way. It is Jamal Abdel Nasser,
Yes,
you know, an
yes,
Egyptian woman,
yes.
married Kwame
Yeah.
Nkrumah, and you know, there were great proponents of this, and the concept of negritude that was developed, you know, in Senegal
Yes.
and also by Diaspora Africans in the Caribbean. You know, we need to get
revisit,
that. We
to
need to get
revisit,
that.
yes.
Yes, you know, modernity needn't be defined only as what happens in the West. You know, these thoughts of finding an African way of doing things is very, very important, and that's what I try to do through this history series, is to say that, you know, for too long there has been the view of looking at the world and at Africa. And as a great man, Patisa Nyati
Yes.
from Zimbabwe said to me, you know, in this series, whom I interviewed, one of the experts, it's the world is too complex to just be seen through the lens
Yes.
of just the view. And you won't understand Africa and the African phenomena if you do that. So that's why, you know, people might say, oh, it's just a history series or whatever, but it is also about Africans reclaiming their voice and reclaiming
Their knowledge.
respect
Yes.
and knowledge and self-respect, because, you know, for too long, Africans have been told that their history has either been denigrated,
Yes.
written by outsiders,
Yes.
or they've been told they don't have any. And that's ironic, because we have the longest history in the world, because it's where humans originated.
Yes, but Zainab, are you not worried that these perceptions, or this enduring, as it were, of the perceptions, will just be from the media alone, or is it because of the way we also live in Africa, or what we exhibit to the world, maybe by our leaders and all that and all that? Do you think it's a mixture of all that?
Yeah, I think it's the two. You're absolutely right. And you're right to say that at the end of the day, we have to hold our leaders to account. And they mustn't wittingly or unwittingly perpetuate some of the stereotypical stereotypes. You know, that Africa is corrupt, that, you know, it's a violent place, that, you know, it has a democratic deficit, that it's got failed states and so on. And of course, you know, as I said, I was born in the Sudan, and when you look at what is happening in South Sudan, which fills me with, you know,
so much pain.
Yeah, great pain, because it was one country until 5 years ago. That certainly is a huge failure of leadership in the country. So you're absolutely right. We are, as I say, in the driving seat of, you know, everything that happens. The good things we can claim credit for, but the bad we also have to be held account for. But that doesn't mean that people on the outside should perpetuate these stereotypes and only cover the bad, without also looking at Africa in a holistic way. Otherwise, people will think that the partial truth is the whole truth, you know.
And that can be dangerous.
And that is dangerous, because reality is complex. And it also, we don't then see how Africans themselves are the most stoical, the most resilient, the most resourceful, entrepreneurial, as you see in Nigeria here. Everybody's an entrepreneur. you know, the kids selling
whatever,
you a
no
box
matter
of
how
matches.
small it is,
Exactly.
yes.
And that spirit is amazing, and that spirit of resilience, and how people don't just take things lying down and so on, that also has got to come through, and how Africans innovate in so many ways. So just don't let the partial truth become the whole.
Now, one thing I must ask you is this: in your journeys throughout the world, and also in your experience interviewing world leaders, do you think the issue of violence, is it just about color or creed, or is it peculiar to skin color, to locations, or violence can be anywhere?
Violence is everywhere. I mean, you know, it's you know, Latin America is very violent. The United States is a very violent country, you know, because of the relaxed gun laws. So, and also when you think about the last 100 years, sadly, the worst genocide has been perpetrated in Europe.
Yeah.
Not anywhere else in the world. And then when you look at the tragedy of the wars in the former Yugoslavia, You know, so Africa doesn't have a monopoly of violence. I mean, it's always sad wherever it happens. And as I said, I'm very, very saddened by the fact that there is still a great deal of violence going on in our continent, and that people sometimes perpetrate these acts of violence with impunity and continuity, and it's something that people must stop. And then you've got people like Olusegun Obasanjo, your former president, who, you know, has tried to act as a troubleshooter in so many of these conflicts, to try to bring about conflict resolution in South Sudan, in Burundi, and so on. Former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, Kofi Annan. You know, so we have got powerful voices and leadership from our elder statesmen, as it were, on the continent, who are trying to knock heads together and say, look, stop this. So there is a recognition, but we need to do more
than that.
Well, and obviously we've got at the International Criminal Court, Fatou Bensouda, who's the prosecutor, who also speaks out. But I know I'm not going to go down the ICC.
No, we won't do that yet.
No.
Now, for our viewers, don't go anywhere. I want you to join the conversation. When we come back, we'll take a short break and we'll take a breather. When we come back, I hope you're going to have your questions for Zeinab. I don't know about if she's going to recruit anybody from here, but please just be ready with your questions, you know, when we come back. Stay with us.
The team say Operation Zero Tolerance. We were saying zero tolerance to deaths on our roads. We were saying having zero crashes, on our roads.
We'd love to see you in Dashiki or Dandogo or Agbada.
The youth still have a very big chance of making a very big difference. That's why I started a lot of projects.
We have not been able to distinguish traditional medicine from traditional religion. So that one has...
Every edition is an arresting conversation with distinguished Nigerians from various strata of the society, bearing their minds on how we can realize the Nigeria of our dreams. Join us live on Close Flow, Monday and Friday, every week here on NTA2 Lagos Network Center. Close Flow. The conversation is about you.
Thank you for staying with us. Well, I'm delighted that so many viewers are watching today. Maybe because Zeinab is here. Well, she's not going to be here every day, so you better make sure that you stay with me anyway, whatever happens, whether she's here or not. Well, thank you for sending in your questions and your comments. She's still with us, but before I will use the privilege of her being with me to ask all the questions before I put all your questions to her. Okay? So just stay patiently, please. Now, quickly, Zeinab, have you heard anything about neuro-linguistic programming?
Neuro-linguistic programming.
You think it can help solve these issues of human relation?
Neuro-linguistic
programming.
So
it's a
what
way
does
of...
it do? What do they do? Program?
To psychologically, help people overcome bullying, overcome, the violence, overcome...
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, God, I don't know. I mean, look, from the age of 3 to 16, I always wanted to be a doctor, but sadly I didn't go down that route.
Well, you're still a doctor.
I'm not sure. But not a medical doctor. I have many doctors in the family, but I don't know. You mean to actually go into people's brains to program things? No, but I think the converse is true, that I think that, young people can be conditioned and become immune to terrible acts of violence around them. We know with the recruitment of child soldiers and so on that they make some of the most, awful killers because they've been conditioned from a very early age. And a tragedy of child soldiers, we've seen them recruited in various parts of Africa. So I think that you can certainly program,
reprogram.
But to reprogram, I suppose through, intensive psychological care. Processes. Yeah. I don't know. Actual surgery, I don't know.
Okay, let's see what our viewers are saying. This is so many. Well, Zeinab is up to it. This is from Blessing from Surulere. Good day, Zeinab. Good to see you on Close Flow. You said something about digital media complementing the traditional media. How is this achievable?
Well, I mean, okay, so for example, if take a story of maybe something that's been happening in a part of the world where
in Nigeria, for instance,
where you may not have a correspondent, but you have a good, reliable NGO on the ground or something like that, somebody who is known, and they take some pictures, some footage or whatever. You can, as the traditional mainstream broadcasters, acquire that footage when you know its provenance. It's true.
I like that. Blessing. Have you heard what Zeinab is saying? That's a job for you. You better come and see me. I can be your consultant. No, you can say that again. So, actually, that's possible.
Oh, no, that is. And we do that. We say eyewitness, accounts or footage acquired from somebody who saw this go. Once, as I say, we know its provenance is accurate, then we can do that and also speak to people on the phone very quickly. So it certainly enables and facilitates the work of broadcasters, because there's nowhere anywhere in the world that something happens, however remote, where there isn't somebody with a phone. So that is just one very clear way. And then I say, so gathering news is one way that it helps,
and
but also in the dissemination, also it gives you additional platforms, mobile phones and online. So that's what I mean by there's a complementarity.
And when you say that, you're actually making citizens of the world to belong to the world, because they can access the information.
Yes. And it also helps, the traditional broadcasters show that, they are operating at a grassroots level. Although the BBC has more correspondents based in Africa than any other international news organisation. I think we have 164 people all over the continent in 48 out of the 54 countries of Africa, or we have partners and so on. So, and obviously, that's because of decades and decades of developing this relationship, and the World Service Radio, and we have the language services, Hausa and so on. And in fact, the BBC is planning to open a new TV station in Yoruba, Hausa and Igbo.
Wow.
So watch this space, yes. Absolutely.
That would be great. Now, let me just draw your mind back to the history series. Now, do you think that we are doing enough here in Africa, within Africa itself?
No. One of your greatest minds here in Nigeria, I was talking to him and I interviewed him about this, Professor Anthony Asiwaju, great historian. His period is from the 19th century. Said to me, Zeinab, history is just not taught, not only here in Nigeria, but that's the case all over Africa. And he said, you can ask people young, middle-aged and old, and it's the same answer, and there just isn't enough. And I went to Lagos University, and the head of the history department there also said the same thing. I walked around Lagos University, did little interviews with...
Speaking to the students.
To the students, the brightest and the best you have here. And I said, what do you know of your history? And they were like, Nigeria was formed in 1911. We were a big source of slaves for the Americas. And I said, beyond the 1800s, and like blank faces, didn't know a thing, and these are your brightest and the best. And then I said, would you like to know more about your history? And they said, absolutely, yes, not just our history, but all of Africa. And, my parents were the same. I remember saying to my mother and father, what do you know about the pyramids and the ancient monuments of Sudan?
Yes.
And my mother said, well, we were taken on a school trip once. And, here are my parents, educated, and these youngsters in Lagos University educated, and it was the same. They didn't know. And I also talked to Olusegun Obasanjo about this, and he said, Zeinab, I could tell you the name of British kings better than I could tell you African history and so on. And he said, this is very, very important. I recognise, of course, that African governments say, look, the path to development is through science, technology, engineering. We have to have the skills and the education for our young people to match the needs of our economies in order to develop. I understand that. However, you cannot say that history does not matter. Because, as I said, it's about regaining self-respect, because otherwise Africa's history, Africa's story is told by non-Africans and outsiders. And that is part and parcel of what has been going on for a long time. And what is the present media narrative is still often dominated by non-Africans when it comes to Africa. And politicians, will say this is what's going on in Africa. So again, as I say, it's Africans seizing control of their own destiny, being in the driving seat of that train and jumping on the journey right from the beginning, not sort of, midway. And that's why history is important.
Okay, now that's a long narrative from Zeinab. For many of you, I'm sure you have lost your history. She's saying to you, if you want to be in the driving seat of your achievement in life, you better make sure you connect with your history. Okay, now quickly, this is Sandra from Ikeja. You said you have been in Lagos eating for some days. What exactly have you been eating, Zeinab? And which one is your favorite?
I have to say, fried plantain is my favorite. I love it. I had a big bowl of it yesterday. Oh my God, with some of your wonderful avocado. I'm not a huge meat eater, so, but that, you know, I the ancient Romans used to eat, feast, and then they'd go and regurgitate and then start all over again. I felt like doing. I know that's a disgusting thought, but you know.
Sandra, so you heard it. She loves dodo. Yes. That's what we call dodo. Yes, that's what she loves. So you better go fry some and bring over here.
That's why I'm wearing this baggy thing, you see, to hide it all.
Mike from VI. Wow, Zeinab, it's good to see you on the other seat and in a lighter mood. How does it make you feel now?
Yeah, you know, people see me on Hard Talk, like, oh my God, Hard Talk, you know. But, you know, I think as if you see this history series, I like to think that in my whole life, you know, I take my subject matter seriously, I take my guests seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. And I think that that's what I've enjoyed about the history series, is it's much more me at play and interacting. Exactly. Yes. And obviously Hard Talk is a wonderful programme, and there's nothing like it, I don't think, in the international media, and it has a very, very important purpose to hold people to account or to challenge opinions of opinion formers and so on. And that is something that I cherish and, you know, will always continue to do. Beautiful. Well, that's kind of you to say. In fact, I'm bringing Hard Talk to Lagos, I hope in November, whereby I hope I'll be able to get 2 or 3 guests, you know, from the political sphere, cultural, as well as from the business world.
Beautiful, that'll be great.
And and if I can get a little audience in as well.
Oh, why not?
Conduct a
Lagosians will be glad to do that.
Exactly. So, you know, Hard Talk is important, but just having something with a slightly lighter touch is...
That's you. That defines you. Okay, all right. Hello, Zeinab. This is Tunde from Ajah. What brings you to Nigeria?
What brings me to Nigeria? Well, I've come to talk about my history series, essentially, but also to explore in what way we can collaborate with Nigerian state television. Because this history series, which is being aired at the moment on the BBC at weekends, because it's my production company that made it for the BBC, and the BBC have been very supportive, but it's my full intention. I want to make the programmes, or I am making the programmes available free of charge to all African state TV stations.
Beautiful.
And so I want to talk to, you know, obviously Nigeria is a huge market, to see whether...
What's 70 million?
Yeah, exactly. To see whether, you know, these...
NTA, the national broadcaster,
this history series, and the BBC, I hope it's their intention to try and put it in some of the subtitles in some of the key languages of Africa, you know, Portuguese, French, Hausa, Arabic, and so on. So it's really to explore those synergies, because we recognise at the BBC that Nigeria is such an important market. It's the most populous African state, obviously, and it's a very dynamic country, and, you know, with a huge market in terms of GDP. So, you know, it's an important country. So I think that is why I'm here. So it's partly courtesy visit, but it's also to tell people about the importance of the series. I should say, you know, the series starts with the origins of humankind, but it finishes around the 13th century. So it's 9 episodes, but it's only the first series, and the next series.
So it's only the tip that we're seeing, because it's going to grow from there.
Because it's a linear narrative of Africa's history, and I'm hoping to come to film some more in Nigeria for the second series.
Okay, so today, stand by. When next is come back in November, you better contact me. I'm the manager now. I'm the road manager. So
you're my campaign manager.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Now, Rose from Bonnie Camp. Hard Talk is my favorite show on BBC. I just want to know which episode has been your most challenging yet.
Oh dear, that's I've been doing it for so long now.
Yes,
I suppose I'd have to say, in a funny sort of way, maybe somebody you wouldn't expect, Desmond Tutu.
No, really?
Yes, because he's a man of great humour and great humility, and I remember saying to him something like, you know, you've been described by the Zimbabwean government as an evil little interfering bishop. And he looked at me and he said, really? And then he started laughing, and his shoulders were going up and down, shaking with laughter. This was on air, you know. And what did I do? I started laughing too. And so actually, if you think about it, it's quite a very effective way of diffusing a difficult story, a difficult question on Hard Talk. And that kind of guest is quite hard to do because they're disarming rather than saying, oh, did they really say that?
Confrontational, rather combative.
Exactly. To diffuse with humour is a very powerful tool. And again, he's an example of somebody who takes what he does very seriously, but he always does it with a light
And use that trick here now.
Well, you're making me laugh.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you for letting me see the trick she's using on me. Now, Bola from Okokomaiko, I've been watching you for so many years and never imagined that you are a mother of 4. I said it. How do you juggle motherhood and your busy career? Well, you said a bit of that, but you can say it again. Yes, okay.
I like the way he says, I've been watching you for many years. Thank you, Bola, for making me feel very old. You know, when people ask me how old I am, I'm like that woman who said she was approaching 50, but wouldn't say from which direction.
You are approaching 50, but either from the front or from the...
Keeping quiet about that.
So, Bola, saying thank you for noticing that. Now, Chukuma from Bar Beach, you said you have been in Lagos for some days, now eating everything. Well, what exactly have you been eating? She said it, maybe you missed it, but now, which of them is your favorite, really?
I said, it is the fried plantain,
yes, that's what you said, okay?
Absolutely, I love it.
Okay.
I could eat it morning, noon and night. Yeah, but that would make me, you know.
Now, I think we will find the antidote to that. Now, Ima from Akoka, have you been interacting? Have you been speaking Pidgin English yet?
I love Pidgin English. Apart from the go slow. I love it. And in fact, actually, I think the BBC are going to be doing something in Pidgin English too, a radio station or a channel, also in Pidgin English. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, because the street patois, really.
It's wonderful, isn't it? It's, you know, it's very evocative, and the use of language is so imaginative and so on. But alas, no, I don't. But I need a few more days, I think, to perfect the Pidgin English.
Ima, maybe you want to take up the job of a teacher. She's going to spend some more days now to learn how to speak Pidgin English. Maybe you better come and teach her. Now, Dixon from VI, is any of your children taken after you?
Oh, right. They're still students. They're students. So we'll see. Maybe one of them. Maybe my younger daughter might. She's very interested in politics. She's a student in university in Britain now. So history and politics. So maybe, yeah.
Okay, I look forward to that. Sarumi from Okoko, is there something you are giving back to your home country and other African countries yet? Well, please say something about this history.
Yeah,
please say that again.
I mean, I feel very passionate about this because although I studied politics and economics at university, I did a postgraduate degree in history, and I think that, you know, when I was at Oxford as a student, I remember there was a professor of history there, and he said, Africa is a continent of darkness, and darkness is not a subject for history. So we're talking about something in my own, you know, memory, and this was the institution where I was studying. They've changed since then, and they recognise that African history is part of world history. So I just, you know, thought this always jarred with me. So what I want to give is, you know, it's difficult to relate African history. We've had some wonderful series in the past. The late Ali Mazrui, the Kenyan historian, he focused very much on Islam in East Africa. But this is a linear narrative, a chronology, you know, starting from the beginning, taking us to the modern era, to the 21st century, looking at all the regions. So it's very systematic.
Profound.
It is very systematic. And I think that... you know, my objectives are, if you watch this series, 3 objectives. You will learn a lot more about Africa's history than you knew before. You will be excited to learn more, and hopefully you'll also be entertained. And I want to make it, by putting it on my website, a kind of educational resource. Some of the interviews that I did, I could only use parts of it in the programme, so the idea is that they will be on the website. I will probably put the programmes on the website too, and just to really get a debate going about, but it's a Pan-African project. I don't want people to think, oh, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from West Africa, I'm not interested in the East or the South or the North. It's Africa's entire history.
The entire continent.
Just as people in Europe, if you're British or French or Greek or Rome or Italian, they will say that ancient Greece and Rome was part of our heritage. It's what we built our civilization on.
Yes.
And I want people in Africa to also recognise that what happened in ancient Sudan, in ancient
Egypt,
Ethiopia,
in Nubia,
Egypt, Eritrea, what is part of your history, it's everybody's history. With Egypt, I very clearly put ancient Egypt in the ethnic and cultural context of Africa. It's not something other than Africa. And when you go to southern Egypt, where a lot of the monuments are concentrated,
yeah.
you know, the people are very
Africans,
obviously
yeah.
African. So that, in a way, you know, it was my objective, because I think that history has to be seared into the imagination
Of our
to be
people.
received. And television is a very powerful tool for doing that, because it's a beautiful continent and there are wonderful experts. I only interview Africans. They can be white.
Throughout.
They can be white, brown,
Dark,
black.
whatever,
It doesn't matter.
but
But they
must
have
be
to be
African,
African.
yes.
You know, the Kenyan paleontologist Richard Leakey is a white Kenyan, but he's Kenyan. You know, he was one of my key interviewees. So I think that's my ambition. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No. I love the way you speak about the history series, and I'm looking forward to it. Now, again, one thing I'd like to say to our viewers with the fact that you're saying Africans need to know a lot more about themselves
Yes.
to really define what they are doing in life. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. You know, you've got to, as I said, it's a question of self-respect. Okay, I'll just give you one example. I think that one of the issues for us has been that African diaspora, the diasporan population, you know, I'm a British African diaspora,
Yes.
but the African American diaspora is the most influential one. And they have obviously focused so much on slavery, civil rights movement. Understandably, I visited the wonderful African American Museum in Washington, and by and large, that's where it picks up the story. And it is right for them to do that, but I would also wish
Want
to
to go a little bit
emphasize
behind
the
on
fact
that.
that African Americans, African Britons, wherever they are, you know, their history didn't just start with slavery. And you have to do that because if you want to tackle racism and prejudice, you have to dismantle the ideology on which racism is based, which ascribes an inferior status to Africans. And if you are seen just as the descendants of slaves or needy outsiders in Europe or wherever, then it doesn't really help to break down that kind of prejudice. So in saying Nigeria has got the wonderful Nok statues from the Nok civilization, hundreds of years
Yes.
BC, these wonderful terracotta figures with the, you know, iron decoration.
Yes.
You know, this is clear evidence of a sophisticated society that flourished in this part of Africa hundreds of years BC. You know, so
It's good for us to know
you need
this,
to know
yes,
that.
and
You
then
need-
imbibe
exactly.
it.
And you need to know the kingdom of Kerma in
Yes.
ancient Sudan predated Babylon, ancient Greece and Rome. You know, wonderful civilizations. The enameling of pottery
Yes.
originated in Africa. So many things. So it's just, as I say, it's about
It's about us.
regaining.
Yes,
Yes,
it's about
yes.
us. Okay, now, it's important that we also ask this. Do you think African government, because now taken from the history series, do you think African government should therefore begin to deliberately, as a matter of policy, invest in arts? I mean, they should, rather than this tokenism. You know, right now in Africa, it's only when you like it that you just put some money in it. But in other countries of the world,
Oh God, yes.
there's
Absolutely. You know, cultural heritage. I mean, look at Britain where I live. I mean, you know, Britain preserves its cultural heritage in such a remarkable way. I'm a trustee of
Yes,
Historic
the
Royal
foundation.
Palaces.
Yes.
Historic Royal Palaces is, believe it or not, it's a charity that runs the Tower of London, Kensington Palace, a number of palaces.
Say that again.
I'm
The
a
charity
trustee.
runs the Tower
Yeah.
of London.
Yeah, so it's absolutely Historic Royal Palaces is a charity, and it gets its money from obviously the entrance fee and so on. But we have 6 or 7 palaces, including Kensington Palace,
Yes.
Hampton Court Palace.
Yes.
So these are, you know, run on
No, you're
absolute
saying
private
no,
funding.
Zainab. If I can just steal that from you. So the Palace of the Oba of Lagos, for instance, the Palace of the Oba of Benin, the Palace of the Oba of Ife. I mean, you are saying that we can actually manage those edifices.
If people put enough money into it. So I'm saying that I know from first-hand experience, being part of this organisation, how much care is lavished on preserving heritage. You know, it's part of a nation.
The study of the people.
Exactly, and I really urge, you know, governments to put more into their, you know, their national museums, and because they've got a wonderful heritage here and art as well. You know, the European historians often said Africa doesn't have any history because it doesn't document. Right, it doesn't have written records. Therefore, Africa's history only existed when the European colonizers came and began writing it.
Yes.
But Africa documents its history only in a different way through art, through oral tradition, and that's why
dance,
you've got dance, music, everything. So you've got to really, preserve these things and examine them, and that's what I do in this series, is to say, just because Africa didn't write always
doesn't
mean that it didn't document, and that you can't understand its history. You've just got to get at it in a different way.
What's your last impression about Nigeria?
My last impression.
Yes, before you fly.
I haven't left yet.
So yes, you're still gonna come back.
My last impression of Nigeria, I always think that great, come to Lagos, get a shot of energy. It keeps me going because it's such a dynamic, busy, bustling, wonderful place. And I like, I'm not the kind of person who could live in the countryside, very quiet, isolated. I love the buzz of Lagos and and the friendliness of the people and so on. So then that's what I take with me. So a big shot of your dynamism.
Thank you so much, Zeinab, for coming in.
Thank you, FM. It's been my pleasure being with all of you. Thank you so much.
Well, for our viewers, of course, the conversation is never over. www.ntlnc.com, youtube.com/NTA2 Lagos. Go there and share what Zeinab has said on this show, especially about the history series.
At the Zeinab Badawi is my Twitter handle.
And please say that again.
At the Zeinab Badawi is my Twitter handle.
That is on Twitter, so just go and follow her and share with your friends, okay? Yeah. So all of us can be better Nigerians and better Africans. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.
Thank you.